Over the past 12 months, as the COVID-19 pandemic swept through the world, many people had to adapt to living entirely indoors. And this has meant that we needed to learn how to work indoors and how to entertain ourselves by relying on smart devices and the networks that connect them. To discuss the impact of increased network demand on communications providers, I'm pleased to welcome Tyson Marian, Chief Commercial Officer at Plume, the company specializing in the delivery of technological services for connected homes. Welcome, Tyson.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it, Max.
Yes, and just to break the ice, so what does a Chief Commercial Officer do at Plume?
Yeah, sure. So, Chief Commercial Officer at Plume, it's really there to serve all of the folks related to sales and sales support. So, my role is to develop the go-to-market strategy and then go and execute that either through direct or channel sales and ensure that all of those account executives are supported, all of our customers are supported through customer success initiatives, and really just focused on growing the business.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand the story correctly, you guys started out as specialists in Wi-Fi optimization, but today the company does so much more. So you could talk me through the new mission of Plume.
Yeah, so I think it was always the mission of Plume. It's true, we cut our teeth in Wi-Fi, but it's always been the mission of Plume to really bring new smart home services to the service providers. And most of the time when people think of smart home, they immediately focus on or think about the devices in the home. In fact, smart home is oftentimes synonymous with Internet of Things. And I think we think about it a little differently. I think first and foremost, our mission was to of course, deliver the best quality of experience in the home as it relates to Wi-Fi. And really the focus there was to solve a problem or a need that we saw in the market. Historically, it's always been about the last mile and bringing fantastic speed and service to the doorstep, if you will. But once you get inside the home, things are very different today with all of these devices inside the home. And we've seen even in the last 5 years, since we started the business, the number of connected devices in a home increased by over 300%, which means that it's really not a game of last mile, it's a game of last few millimeters on unlicensed spectrum called Wi-Fi. And most people today think that that's the internet. So our mission is, that's sort of where we cut our teeth, but to really build a platform that allows service providers a path to market through these new services. And then also on the back end to really think about how do you deliver a better customer experience. And the way that we believe that that's done well is not when we call up and we have an issue for somebody to tell us to power on or off our router or device, and that's supposed to solve the problem. Rather, customers expect more bespoke customer service. So what they're looking for is an intelligent conversation about what's actually happening in their home based on the topology, the unique topology of that home, the unique set of devices and the unique set of services that they consume over those devices. And in this industry that typically has, NPS scores of -5 to 5 as being good, we look at that as another problem to solve. And ultimately, when you combine a path to market with new services and smart home services and better customer experience, we believe that ultimately leads, and we have proven that it leads to a lower churn, which is the most expensive thing that all of the service providers face in the industry. So really Wi-Fi was sort of the beginning, but really it's about a platform to deliver many more services around that broadband experience. And then on the back end, to deliver services for the service provider, workflow automation tools, if you will, to be able to provide a better customer care experience.
Mm-hmm. And obviously customer demand and customer interest is very, very important, but another important metric is the interest of investors. And you guys recently closed a Series E funding round and with 270 million in funding, and that brings your valuation to 1 billion, and that makes you a unicorn in kind of startup language. So why are investors so interested in what you're offering right now?
Yeah, so it's great. So the valuation, I believe, was right around a 1.4 billion after the funding. And Insight was our main partner in that investment, and they're a fantastic partner for us. They bring a lot of value, not just with the money that they provide, but a lot of operational benchmarking and improvement to really help us think through how we go and win in this market. So very pleased there. I think the reason investors seem to be very interested in our space today, first and foremost, is they look at the size of the market itself. I think what people don't realize is that there are tens of thousands of service providers in this world. Most of the time we think of the large ones, whether it's a Comcast, a Liberty Global, a JCOM, a Telstra. They think of it, most people just think of the big, these big service providers. But the reality is that there are tens and thousands of service providers in the world. In the United States alone, there's probably over 5,000 service providers. So the addressable market in terms of service providers is something that always the investors are going to look at and say, this is very interesting. When you couple that with the number of broadband households and small businesses in the world, it sort of backs that up. It backs up that there's this big market of service providers, but there's a big market of customers that those service providers ultimately serve. So that combination of things is quite important. What's more important, what's unique to Plume, is that because Plume is a platform, it's a true platform where services are enabled on this platform from the same core set of technology. It means that once we first engage with the service provider, that's just the beginning. And then we begin to offer additional or incremental services that sit on top of the platform itself, which makes it very easy for our service provider customers to ingest, if you will. But at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to upsell and capture more wallet share inside of a service provider. So it's really about addressable market. And when you think about how large the number of service providers are out there, how many broadband households and small businesses there are out there, and then when you couple that with Plume, that's a platform that can add in additional services, and we've shown that we continue to innovate and do that quickly, the opportunity, there's the economic opportunity uniquely that Plume can uniquely deliver to our investors is something that's differentiated and nobody else can do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And why are they concerned about this? The telecommunications providers, like how has the competitive landscape changed for them in the last couple of years? They have like new problems that just weren't there before, and now they have to compete not just against other telecommunications companies, but also against content providers like Netflix or Disney Plus. So yeah, what effect does that have on the kind of the importance of quality of service?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what's unique about this industry is that it's very homogenous. Whether you're as large as a Liberty Global, or whether you're as small as, we have customers that have 500 total subscribers. We have everything in between. What's unique is that they're all facing the same problems, regardless of their size, regardless of their geography. They all face the same issues, and really the core issue that they're facing is that the service, the go-to-market strategy and the business strategy for the service provider industry has been it's been tried and true for decades, and that's to sell us a bundle of services. And that bundle was typically fixed line voice, video, and data being broadband. And as the new entrants like a Netflix or other folks really started to come into their space, Amazon, Google, and start offering basically the same products, in this case being video, for instance, it presented a tremendous challenge. And the same with voice. People tend to think, well, I don't need fixed line voice, but the question should really be, why don't we need fixed line voice today? And why has OTT video really become a thing? It's really because we live in this on-demand world where we want everything, we want it now. And so if you think about the way we communicate, it's not that people don't want to pay for communication anymore. It's just the way we communicate is different. We communicate over Slack, over text messages, over Microsoft Teams. And those are instantaneous communications, all delivered from the cloud. Video is the same thing. We no longer want to sit and watch commercials. We want to binge watch, and we want to watch only those shows that we want, right? Because it's this on-demand world. And all those services, again, delivered from the cloud. So if you think about that, if that's happened in voice and it's happened in video, and we've seen the impact to the service provider where they're losing subscribers in those triple play product mixes, we've actually seen a shift to where now the predominant mix in a service provider's portfolio are single play products, and it's really the broadband service itself. And so when you think of that, it would be naive for us to believe that these large tech companies who grew up in the cloud, right, where they were able to deliver WhatsApp or Slack or whatever it was, or Netflix, right, or YouTube Red, that they're not going to try and do the same thing in the broadband or smart home space. Well, and they are. So yes. Plume sort of sits there and says, look, we're going to beat them, and we're going to beat them. It's not where it was, again, it used to be a game of last mile, and now it's last few millimeters. The other thing that has changed, it's no longer a game of speed. Speed does not differentiate the network. In fact, Plume has 27 million active locations currently today that it manages. Of those 27 active million locations, if you took a look at the distribution of speeds, right, on that network, the vast majority, 80%, are going to be between 75 and 150 megabits. Yes, everybody's offering 1 gig and multi-gig, but consumers are not buying that. They're totally fine with 75 or 150 megs. And that's what we've seen in our distribution, which is a large enough distribution to suggest the rest of the world sits at somewhere between 75 and 150 megs. So the differentiator for these the service providers is not the speed itself, it's the speed in which you can deliver new services, new smart home services. So when is the next smart home service going to come? And given that Plume is a software-defined network, where we can essentially release new services at the flip of a switch, and our service provider customers can deploy those just as fast, that's what's going to differentiate them against big tech and ultimately allow them to keep and maintain and create essentially a moat around their existing space and really that broadband product itself. So that's sort of what's changed for us. And if you think about it, the smart home service that we're delivering, you can think of, and we believe that in the future, in the near future, that service providers will offer a smart home service to their customers, not broadband, a smart home service. And along with it will come your Wi-Fi connection. You don't need, as a consumer, don't need to know how fast it is. You may not even care how fast it is, so long as application load is good, and you don't see those wheels of death spinning or grainy pixelation whenever you're trying to watch Netflix or Disney or whatever it might be. All you want is good quality of service, plus you want cybersecurity, parental controls, right?
What other factors influence the quality of your network that you might not immediately think about? And can AI and analytics help here? And can CSPs essentially use their data better to ensure this quality of service?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Plume's, again, this core product, our flagship product called Adapt, it's part of our Home Pass suite, which has, basically Plume has suites of services. Home Pass is the residential suite of services. Work Pass is our small business suite of services. And then we have Haystack and Harvest, which are service provider facing suites. And inside those suites, you have multiple different services. Adapt is our flagship service within Home Pass. Again, as I mentioned, it's a software defined network. And this is a key point. And it's a key point. And the reason we built this software defined network is because we wanted to future proof ultimately a consumer's experience in their home. If you think about it, you had mentioned just now, 10 years ago, Microsoft, building projectors and creating this home of the future. 5 years ago, nobody knew what a Peloton bike was. But guess what? The Peloton bike is in, you can't order it now without having to sit on a 1-year wait list. But those are things that are going to happen, and they're going to come into our homes. And we don't know what the next thing is that's going to come into our homes. We just simply know that if we say there are more devices in the home today than ever before, and more services consumed on those devices than ever before, that we can say that every single day for the next 20 years, and it will still be a true statement every single day. There will always be more. And so you have to create a software-defined network to be able to provide that good quality of experience versus a hardware-centric. Hardware-centric means that basically when you buy a piece of hardware that has hardware specific limitations, that the world moving so fast around it at such a ferocious pace, ultimately the day you put that piece of hardware inside of a home or a small business is the day it starts aging, and there's not much you can do about it, its limitations or what happens around it. With us, we've separated software from hardware so that we can do things to create a better quality of experience, not just speeds, but do things like advanced device typing to understand what devices come onto the network, and then moving those devices around the network to create that better quality experience. So for example, here's how it works. I'm sitting inside my home. I open my MacBook and I want to start a Netflix session. And so here's what happens. When that MacBook attaches to a Plume network, it ultimately says, our network says, hey, I see MacBook, tell me some things about yourself. It says, I'm a MacBook Air or I'm a MacBook Pro. I was built in 2018. I have this version of OS running on me. I have a 2, 4, and a 5 gigahertz chip by these chipset vendors, right? I'm sitting in the back bedroom. I'm connected to a particular access point in the back bedroom, but I'm also fighting for airtime with these 2 Nest cams on the outside of my house. And oh, by the way, the neighbor next door is actually also watching a show on Hulu and is creating some interference. All that happens, and in milliseconds, the machines say, thank you, MacBook Pro. I understand what you're trying to do. Here's what I want you to do now. Sends a rule back down, right? There's a huge math problem that takes place. It sends a rule back down to a control plane at the local level and says, okay, thank you, MacBook Pro. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to move from 2.4 to 5 gigahertz. Not only do I want you to move there, I want you to stay there. And because you're fighting for airtime with these 2 Nest cams, I actually want you to move to the access point literally on the opposite side of the house. And when you move to the opposite side of the house, I want you to move from channel 44 on Wi-Fi to channel 117 or whatever it is, right? I want you to do all these things. These things happen in milliseconds by our machines so that ultimately the consumer has a perfect quality of experience at the moment they want to consume. And it optimizes itself for throughput because it's a Netflix session. Had it been a FaceTime session, it would have optimized for packet loss. Or if it was an Xbox session for a gaming session, it would have optimized for latency. These are the things that our machines do. And just think of how large the number of devices are that are coming into the home. It's impossible to do that manually or through hardware and brute force. It has to be done very elegantly. And that's why you need the machines to do it, because it's just too big. And so if you want to create that good quality of experience, and you're talking with folks out there, if you're a service provider that are hardware centric focused and are not a software defined platform, the moment you put that hardware in is the moment that your network begins to age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes all the sense in the world. And it's just like, yeah, people a little bit older in the audience will remember, like hunting for uncongested channels and how much of a pain that is. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so you mentioned WorkPass, and WorkPass is a sort of like a very recent addition to your lineup, and WorkPass is an interesting product line because it sees Plume kind of going down market and addressing small to medium businesses. So yeah, if you could like quickly explain what WorkPass is.
Yeah, so WorkPass, if you think of HomePass, which is the suite for the residential side, WorkPass is same thing except purpose built for the small business. And there are a lot of similarities. So for instance, inside of a residential home, one of the things that's very important is parental controls, right? You don't want your kids, seeing the wrong things on the internet. At the same time, inside of a small business, instead of children, they're employees. And what are your employees doing every day when they come into work? Both residential space and small business space want great connectivity. So our Adapt product is working similarly inside of a residence as it is to a small business. Now in the small business, you have different things. You typically have more people inside that small business visiting that small business. You're maybe going to have more access points. You're also going to want to have access points that are always on. We have a new device that we've designed called Plume Aeon, means always on. That device has LTE backup in it. So for the additional devices that sit inside of a small business, they're different. you have a point of sale system that is extremely critical to that business. So you want to ensure that if Wi-Fi, if the network itself goes down, you still have LTE backup so that you can continue taking orders and what have you. Also inside a small business, difference there is you have different zones. So you have an employee zone, you have a patron zone, and you have a management zone. You want your patrons to be able to come in, access through a captive portal. You as a small business want to communicate with your patron about maybe specials that are happening inside your small business, what have you, but allow people to connect. You don't want those patrons being able to access things like the Sonos system to change the music, but you're okay having your employees go ahead and access those devices to change the music. But if you're a manager, you don't want your employees having access to certain things that may contain financial information. So if you have a network sitting inside that small business, you can segregate patron, employee, and management. And that's a big difference for the small business. And then finally, in the side of the small business, you're going to want to have unique analytics to a small business. How many people are coming in? Where do they go inside your location? What do they actually do? And if you want to, you can do things like throttle. You can throttle their usage inside that small business. Inside the house, you may do that with your kids. You say, look, you only have an hour's worth of screen time per day. In the small business, you may say, look, you can sit in here for 24 hours, but I'm going to throttle your services. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to prioritize those things that are needed for my business. So given we're a software-defined network, we can actually prioritize particular applications and device traffic so that those things are always crystal clear and crisp. Whereas the small business, the patrons and stuff, yes, they can still do things in there, maybe surf the net, but sitting back and watching Netflix for hours and hours, maybe you don't want them doing that. Or maybe you do, but they have to every hour come and buy another coffee, for instance, or whatever it might be. And it's fantastic, not just for the small the coffee shop, but if you think of franchises, inside franchises, you have less than 20 people working inside that franchise location. It's perfect for franchises as well. So when we think of small business, we typically think about 25 employees or less at that particular location. So we're not trying to go too far up market into enterprise, not necessarily too far down market, although that's fine. We think there's a huge gap between enterprise solutions, I like to call them enterprise hacks, that have come in to try and attack the small business and capture that market, or the do-it-yourself market where you go to your local electronics store, you buy a router and you try and set it up, but you have no technical support. We think there's something that squarely sits in between there that's purpose-built for the small business and gives them almost more of a consumerish experience to manage and control their small business. And those things just don't exist from those large enterprise hacks that come down into the small business or the do-it-yourself models that come up into the small business.
Mm-hmm. No, that absolutely makes sense, because it's like, yeah, small business, again, you have one, maybe two IT people, and it's just like, yeah, if you can take it out of their hands and just like, yeah, they don't need to think about access to the Sonos system, right?
And I think what's key too is if you think about these service providers, given that bundle of services that they've been selling for so long and has been very good is under attack, they're all thinking about what's their next revenue stream, right? And I always say the biggest way to grow your top line is to go capture another addressable market. And so for all these service providers who've been predominantly focused for years and years and years with the residential side of the house, this gives them an opportunity to expand their business into the small business sector, right? Or the commercial segment, and ultimately start capturing small businesses as another addressable market for them. And what's unique there is that they know how to do it. It's not such a far divergence away from what they do today. They don't have to think about how do I beat Google and create a marketplace for advertising or something. These little incremental things can, ultimately, they can realize a ton of new revenue and profit by just taking what they have, doing incremental changes to it, and ultimately capturing that new commercial segment. And that's exactly what Plume has done from a single platform. You don't have to change hardware. You don't have to change your back-end systems. Literally, you can offer WorkPass and HomePass simultaneously and serve them with the same back-end support tools. And that's key for these folks. very much more cost effective. So.
No, it makes sense, and essentially the same audience that you used to sell cellular connections to. So yeah, just offer them something new. Well, thank you, Tyson. This makes all the sense in the world, and that practical explanation in particular was very, very good, because it's just like, yeah, it's good to hear, how exactly it works, and I think your example kind of like it really did clear it up a bit. Well,
Good.
thank you very much for your time. There's no stopping Plume. We'll definitely hear about this again. So good luck in your work. And yeah, I hope that telcos are very receptive to your message.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate it.